In this episode, I had the honor, privilege, and pleasure to have a wonderful conversation with Lilly Rachels. Lilly Rachels is a relationship coach with a master's degree in social work and a background in therapy and trauma sensitive yoga. Specializing in inner child work, she helps clients build and maintain supportive relationships. Lilly sits on the advisory board for Survivors for Change, which is an organization that supports survivors of sexual abuse. Through her online community and coaching practice, Lilly empowers individuals to heal past wounds, break unhelpful patterns, and communicate effectively to create fulfilling relationships. She is also the host of the Relearn Relationships podcast. Connect with Lilly at www.relearnrelationships.com. The link to the website and also some other social media platforms to connect with Lilly will be in the show notes and description. Enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Awakened Reflections podcast. And today with me, I have Lilly Rachels. Lilly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. How are you?
Oh, I am ecstatic. Ecstatic seems to be the embodying word and feeling that feels accurate at this moment. So it's exactly how I'm feeling, and that's my state of being. I'm really excited to have you on to the show today. Thank you for reaching out, and I am excited to see and experience all of the wisdom and love that you are going to present to me and to the audience today.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, for the shortest summary that you can, because we can definitely dive deeper into these topics, what is it that you exactly do?
I help motivated individuals find and keep supportive relationships and break down any patterns or barriers that maybe they've carried from childhood that are keeping them from really connecting with other people, particularly romantic partners.
So would you say your work is more aligned of relationship with self or relationship with others, or is there a balance between the two?
I would say there's a balance between the two. Most of my work, like when I work one-on-one with clients, we're really unpacking the relationship they had with their parents and primary caregivers, which is influencing their relationship with romantic partners and also their relationship with themselves. So it's kind of a holistic approach because we've got to address all three of those things in order to really find that deep connection.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we can definitely dive into each one of those three topics you talked about. Yeah, I've always wondered, why does it seem to be true from my own experience that this is what you also seem to believe in? Why and how the childhood upbringing affects your romantic and personal relationships you have with people later on in life as you transform from kid to child, teenager to adult. Why does childhood really set the foundation for the rest of your life, or at least two different areas of your life?
Yeah. So I like to think of it as, when we're little, we're like sponges. We're soaking up the world around us. Our brains are forming all the neural connections and we're learning different things. And we observe a lot from our parents and how they communicate with one another, how they move through conflict, or whoever raised you, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily mom and dad. It could be whatever your family looked like, but the primary adults in your life. So you absorb a lot from them. And I think of it as if you learn to drive a car by following the car in front of you. So if the car in front of you had, they stopped at every stoplight, they used their turn signal, they went the speed limit, you might end up a pretty good driver. But what if the car in front of you was running the stop signs, was swerving off the road, maybe they were driving drunk? You might have adopted some ideas about relationships and how you move through conflict that are not helpful. And a lot of times what happens when we're kids, because we crave, safety and security from our primary caregivers, when we don't get safety and security, we do what we have to do to kind of give it to ourselves. So that could look like maybe when you were little, in order to get your needs met, you threw tantrums and you got loud and you screamed, and finally mom met your needs, maybe comforted you or gave you food, whatever it was, whatever that need was. And so you have this pattern, and until you become aware of it in your adult relationships, you might find yourself kind of throwing a tantrum or throwing a fit or getting really loud and angry when your partner's not meeting your needs. Or maybe when you were little, you learned that, no one really is going to meet my needs. I have to take care of myself. And when you're older and you try to get into relationships, you realize you're not very emotionally available and open to even allowing someone else to care for you and nurture you. Because when you were little, it served you to take care of yourself. It kept you safe. And so we can develop these patterns of behavior when we're little that until we become aware of them and we realize that they're influencing our lives, it's just like automatic pilot in our romantic relationships. And so we'll focus more on like the difficulties maybe we're having with this person, not realizing that if we address that very first relationship we were in, the one with our primary caregivers, it makes other relationships flow so much more easily.
How much would you say that those relationships from your childhood to your caregivers or whoever's watched over you affects everything in your life as, say, an adult? Does it like really run the program behind the scenes, or is there like, in your experience, how much of that really dictates your whole current reality?
Yeah. I would say it influences all of the relationships that you get into, whether they're platonic, romantic, a relationship with a boss, how you parent your children, so relationships with your children. Those initial relationships that you experience as a child influence every relationship you have in life. Now, maybe to varying degrees, and it also depends, what did it look like for you as a kid? Like it could have been a very traumatic upbringing, or it could have been, there was one or two things that were off, but for the most part, I felt safe and secure and loved, and I was able to develop a healthy attachment style and so on and so forth. So it'll depend on like what your childhood looked like. But I do believe that yes, like the way you were raised in your early childhood experiences, until you really become aware and start to get curious and dig in, they're just going to influence every type of relationship you get into.
Yeah, I picked out a word that I noticed that you said in there. You said attachment. What is the role of attachment in relationships? Because attachments can inevitably lead to suffering and heartbreak and a lot of other physical and mental and spiritual and emotional problems or traumas. Is it okay to have those, or how do we navigate attachments to current partners or things like that?
Yeah, so I think there's two different things there. So when I'm using the term attachment, I'm talking about like attachment theory, which is, if we look on a continuum, there's avoidant and anxious and secure in the middle. So your attachment style is how you form connection with another person. And that is heavily influenced by how you formed connection to your primary caregiver. So someone with a secure attachment likely had a caregiver that, when you cried, they comforted you. When your diaper was wet, they changed it. When you were hungry, you were fed. You were taken care of. Someone who's more avoidant had a caregiver who was pretty absent, who wasn't there, and that child was left to meet their own needs. And then someone who's more on the anxious part of the continuum likely had a primary caregiver who was there and not there. It was like sometimes mom showed up, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes dad was there, sometimes he wasn't. And so that type of attachment theory is a little bit different than when we look at just attachment to things, because I think the type of attachment you're talking about is a little bit different. But that attachment theory can affect other things. For instance, someone with a more anxious attachment style may be more likely to develop codependency in relationships, whereas someone with a more avoidant attachment style may be more likely to be kind of emotionally unavailable and aloof in relationships. And so it's all about what can we do to, remove those barriers so we can come to this place of, security where we can have interdependence with someone else, which would be, if we're in a relationship, I can lean on you and you can lean on me. We can depend on each other, but we're not, codependent where it's like enmeshment. Does that help clarify a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's all about being complete and also having the other partner being complete and also experiencing and sharing and intertwining like completeness together. It's like a dance. It's like the way that I am understanding it because I like putting like topics and philosophies into like analogies or something
Hmm.
I could picture in my head to really understand things. And it's like
Yeah.
you hold your end of the bargain, your partner holds the end of the bargain, and it's also if something falls out, you could help fill and play that role to support, and vice versa.
Yeah. I
Does that
think
seem to be does that seem to be pretty accurate in that
it is
assessment?
an analogy I love to give people when it comes to kind of like a healthy relationship is I like rock climbing. So if you imagine you were going rock climbing with your partner, the person you're in a relationship with, a relationship that's codependent would be like if we're both standing at the bottom of the rock wall and we decide to hook arms with one another and we're going to start climbing the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is because we're so enmeshed, if one of us was to let go or slip or fall, we're both going to fall down because we're in this
Mm-hmm.
enmeshed relationship. Now, on the other hand, if you and your partner were more, if is more hyper independent, we would both look at each other and just start climbing the wall as quick as we could, right? As
Mm-hmm.
quick as we could. And one person may get way ahead of the other. So if that person slips, there's no one there to like reach down and be of support. And it's like we're just going as fast as we can on our own. And then an interdependent relationship, like you said, like a dance together where we're moving and flow with one another, would be like, okay, we're both going to start climbing. And I don't know if you know anything about rock climbing, but we're going to clip in as we go, right? That clipping in could be, we're checking in with one another. We're having uncomfortable conversations. We're communicating clearly. We're making time for intimacy. And that way is we're climbing together and we're each doing our thing. We're doing our part, but we're also, staying with the other person. If one of us starts to slip, we're clipped in. We're not going to fall all the way down because we're taking time to work on our communication. We're taking time, like I said, to build our intimacy so that the relationship can thrive. But we're not like that first part where we're holding on to one another in that enmeshment. I don't know if that gives you kind of a better
Mm-hmm.
visual.
I can understand that for sure. You described it very well.
Oh, thank you.
In your definition, in your perspective, understanding, what is a healthy relationship? Because I'm sure everyone has their own version of what they visualize what healthy looks like, especially in the relationship scene. So, coming from you, in your perspective, what is your definition of a healthy relationship?
Yeah. For me personally, a healthy relationship is a relationship that inspires growth together, but also growth as individuals. So, a healthy relationship is not necessarily easy. I don't buy into the idea that if it's, if you're right, if you're with the one, it should just be easy because, at least in my experience of life so far, life can get very challenging. And even if you have, a great flow together in your relationship, there are things that will happen outside of your relationship that bring on stress. Maybe, you lose someone that's close to you, you lose a job, something happens. And so a healthy relationship is where two people are dedicated to having the uncomfortable conversations and continuing to grow together. So it's coming to a place where, I think about if you ever watched any romantic comedies or Disney movies, they always show, up until the relationship begins and then it stops. It's they lived happily ever after. They never show, what does happily ever after look like. And I believe happily ever after, again, is that dedication to growth that we've decided, because love is a decision, like we are doing this together and we're going to keep working towards this we're going to keep trying to grow instead of just looking for the other person to meet every need. It's like, how can I grow as an individual but also grow for my partner? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. And so, on that same topic, what is going to be like the key contributor that binds that together? Because I'm make an assumption and say it's communication from when stresses of life outside of the relationship and how demands how that affects the relationship. Like for example, like you said, a loved one dies, a career or financial choice or disruption happens in your life, and since you're together in a relationship or a marriage or whatever, is communication the biggest one, the only one, or is it, or like what's the role? Like what's the glue that holds that together to make sure everything's fine from things outside a relationship that can affect the actual relationship?
Yeah. I think communication, I think of it as the lifeblood of relationships. A relationship without Now, I'm not going to say won't last, because I know people that have been married 50 years that I wouldn't say are in healthy relationships. The relationship, they're still together, but they're not exactly thriving and enjoying and growing together. They've just, gotten divorced. So I would say a healthy relationship requires communication, particularly the ability and the willingness to have really uncomfortable conversations, because I found that relationships do go through seasons. I always think of love as a decision and a choice, not a feeling. Now, we can feel loved, but if we base love for a partner on how we emotionally feel, then there will likely be days where you're like, I don't love my partner. But if love is a decision and a verb and an action, then we can still choose to, I'm choosing the relationship even when I don't feel like it. So I'm choosing to communicate even when it's uncomfortable and difficult. And so I think that's what keeps relationships together, is the dedication. It's the decision that we're both, again, committed to the growth of this. So even when we don't feel like it, we're still going to show up. It's like deciding you're going to go to the gym. And I don't know if you like to work out, but it's if you wake up in the morning and you're like, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to go to the gym. But if you do go to the gym and you go to the gym consistently, you start to see change in your body. Even if you don't want to, it still grows. So relationships are the same way. It's the dedication and the showing up and the choosing to communicate. So your question about how important is communication for a healthy, enjoyable relationship, it's vital. Being able to openly share what's going on in your life. Now, I do believe men and women, we're different when it comes to communication. So, for women, when we bond with someone, we bond through sharing. That's why women, when we get together, we like to talk a lot and we like to share. Men tend to bond more through solving, fixing things, solving problems together. And so that can get a little tricky with communication when you're in a relationship, because I think any ladies listening, you've probably been in a situation where you're like, I just wanted him to listen. I didn't want him to fix it. And guys are probably like, why did you bring this to me if you don't want solutions? I want to help you. So it is important to realize, we do have those differences where it's like maybe in communication, one person is just trying to share, another person wants to solve. And that also comes into, women, we like to emote a little bit more and share our emotions. And I always really encourage my male clients to, if you don't want to share necessarily your feelings, just share the context of your struggle. Let her in and let her know, hey, today was a bad day and I'm dealing with it, but I just want you to know I could use some more support. It doesn't mean you have to sit there and cry and be like, oh my gosh, today was so hard. So our communication can look different, but it is vital for a relationship to grow and be healthy, that the people in the relationship learn how to communicate well with one another.
What would you say to those couples that, as you mentioned earlier, are dedicated to the growth, but over a long period of time, maybe 5 years, 10 years, or even longer, it's not healthy? They're dedicated to keep trying to make this thing work, but on the external, it's like you're not seeing any progress. Is that a good sign to part separate ways, or is just the power of dedication and communication enough to keep that relationship going forever?
I don't believe that every relationship is supposed to last a lifetime. I do think, and I have in my life had relationships that were, I love the idea of a reason, a season, or a lifetime, that I know that they were in my life for a reason, or maybe it was for a season. So I don't think there is any shame in two people realizing that, we are actually not meant to be in partnership long term. We were both dedicated. We're both working on it. We're both trying, but we've come to the conclusion that forcing this isn't really good for either one of us. And so I think that it's such a gray area, because it's so specific to the relationship, right? I don't think there's a rule of thumb. And I've had people ask me that, well, how do you know when you need to give up on the relationship? And my answer to that typically is, well, when, if one person has decided to no longer participate, right? I've seen that happen where I'll have a client that's in a relationship and they're like, I'm working on this, but my partner is just unwilling to participate. And it's well, you can't you can't have a relationship by yourself with another person, but it is such a gray area. And so I occasionally work with couples. Most of the time I work with individuals. But if it comes to that, I always encourage people to go slow, because when it comes to a relationship ending, I love the saying, don't cut what you can untie, and to move slowly, unless of course it's, a bad relationship where there's abuse or something happening. But if it's a relationship where like we really do love and care about each other, we've done the work on ourselves, that there's nowhere for us to continue to grow together, is to just move slow in that untying of the relationship. Because a lot of times it can feel like this is never going to work. This isn't good. And the truth is, maybe you just need to take a breath and step back and then, revisit what the problems really are.
What has been the inspiration for you to get into uh, relationship coaching and helping people through relationships? What's the inspiration? What's the journey that led you to this point?
Yeah. Honestly, it was the way I grew up. When I was younger and my parents would get into fights, I remember times where I would go talk to my mom and then I'd go talk to my dad. And in my head, I'm like, they just need to talk to each other. And if they did talk to each other and I was around and it escalated again into another fight, it's like I had a really hard time understanding, like, well, if two people love each other, they say they love each other, how come they can't work it out and talk it out? It did not, make sense to my child brain. And it was actually through getting into, a relationship in my 20s and watching that relationship fall away that I was like, I want to learn more about, human behavior and how people can work together and how they can heal things. So I decided to pursue a master's in social work and get into therapy. And it was then when I truly realized it wasn't just that, I look at my parents, that they couldn't have a conversation and work it out. It's that they were still carrying all their past wounds and all their past hurts from, their early childhood experiences, things that had happened to them in their life, into the relationship and the conflict. And I got really, I would say, almost obsessed with helping people uncover those patterns that they developed so that they could communicate and they could be together. Because at the end of the day, I'd say I'm a romantic. I don't want anyone to break up. I want everyone to have, deep, intimate, loving relationships. So I would say that, yeah, it was those early, for me, it was those early childhood experiences that really pushed me towards this work, because I love to see healing and people coming back together.
So would you suggest and recommend that people do the therapy, the healing, the inner child work, the shadow work before they go into relationships? Is that what you would suggest before people bring that baggage along with them, perhaps like your parents did, and probably most 99% of couples get into?
What I did. Yeah.
I think we all do.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, learn to ride the bike before you sign up for the, triathlon idea. So yes, I would say if you're single right now, the best thing you can do is start to figure out, like, what are the things in my life that are keeping me from connection with someone else? What are some patterns that I am bringing into relationships? What are the things I need to work on? Because that's all you have control over. But I don't think that, a lot of us, and I know myself included, we start to see the things we need to work on because we're in a romantic relationship. And that's what I love about relationships and growth, is as far as I've found, there is no better way to see where your growth edges are in life than to be in a romantic relationship, because that shines a light on kind of our shortcomings and where we can grow more than anything, because it's someone who's just so close to us. So yes, if you're single, I would say do the work on yourself now and know that more things will likely come to light when you are in a relationship. I was talking to a girlfriend about this the other day. I was like, it's almost like you reach the next level where you're like, oh, I did that work. And then something else comes up and you're like, that's what I have to tackle next. So be prepared that I don't think we're ever done growing. That's why I think, relationships for me are about growth. But I would say, yes, if you are single, start now. Don't wait. But if you're in a relationship, you can still start working on yourself. And the beautiful thing is, if you're in a relationship and you start working on the things that are keeping you from connection. And again, kind of going back and really understanding the influence your early childhood experiences had on you and are having on your relationship. Even if your partner's not doing anything, the relationship will likely get better because you're working on yourself.
What would you consider that encompasses the work? Like, what are some of those practices, tools, tips, techniques that you've helped clients with or you've experienced yourself that's helped you heal, whether it's the inner child or other parts of your life to turn into a healthy relationship?
I think there are a number of modalities you can use. So, for instance, for someone who maybe had a very traumatic upbringing or traumatic past, I would encourage them to definitely work with a practitioner, maybe even someone who's licensed in something like somatic experiencing or some other trauma modality. When I'm working with clients and we're starting to dig into, how does my past affect my present? Just a couple of places I always have people start is, number one, get clear on what love even means to you, because we all walk around with different definitions and ideas of it. And if I have a belief of what love is and you have a belief of what love is, so we try to love each other out of what we believe love is, it might not feel like love to the other person. So if you're in a relationship, I think that can be a really useful place to start. Another place that I tend to start with people is learning to truly experience your emotions and express them in a healthy way. Because what a lot of us do is, on one hand of the spectrum, we may suppress them and just push it down and be like, I don't feel this way. I'm fine. Everything's good. Or maybe we express it in an unhealthy way by, just bursting into tears when we don't get our way or yelling at our partner. And so it's learning. And I all of my clients, I encourage them to start meditation practices, but starting to notice like what things feel like in your physical body and starting to notice and catch yourself when it's like when I say do the work, it's like noticing like I'm angry, but like why? It's like getting curious, it's like asking yourself why, like, man, I'm really like frustrated with my partner. It's like, but why? So just those simple pauses and moments of awareness can be a great place to start. And like I said, getting clear on like, what does love even mean to me? And if you're in a relationship, talking to your partner about that.
Would you suggest to those people who are numb to emotions? Because I see it a lot in my guy friends, including myself. There's been periods of life where we just completely suppressed our emotions because sometimes a little bit here in United States or that society, well, there's that saying, like that whole stereotype of like, oh, men, you don't need feelings, just do where we need to get done, like that whole storyline. Because for me, a very small, brief overview of my healing journey through relationships is like my traumatic event in life happened from when I was 13 during a middle school breakup from someone who I was deeply attached to. And that was completely ripped out from me. I had no chance to speak my or express my emotions because I had all that. I didn't have a chance to respond or stand my case, and so for following that, I went through 3 breakups, which I was cheated on all 3 times, and I really numbed myself and was detached from expressing my emotions until recently, to where I figured out, okay, I did a lot of shadow work and conversations with therapists, and I figured out what the root cause was. Then I did practices to heal that. But what would you recommend as a practice to help people to express their emotions that's been deeply suppressed, that you would say?
When it comes to things that have been deeply suppressed, I do think I love inner child work because a lot of times, it's partly, you said it, like societal conditioning, but a lot of times we learn to start suppressing, not just from society, but again, from our parents. So maybe when you were little, and I'm not saying this is true for you, but maybe someone who's listening, it's like when you started to like cry or show any emotion, it was like, stop, it was shut down. I think of it this way, we're conditioned in a lot of ways when we're little. For instance, think about if you've ever told your mom like, hey, I'm hungry. And she's like, no, you're not. Dinner's in an hour. It's like we're taught at a young age in little ways to just start kind of pushing down what we're actually experiencing. And so, for one, I would say if you truly struggle with, you know, expressing what you're feeling and you are suppressing, like find someone that can help you do that deeper work. And like you said, that shadow work, like find someone for that. Now, if you're like, how could I start doing this on my own? I love encouraging people to start to just notice sensations in their physical body. So, a lot of times, men, even if they struggle with suppressing their emotions, they can still access anger. Anger tends to be a very accessible emotion, even when, all the other stuff can be pretty buried. So, when you find yourself in a place, anytime you feel angry, taking a second to sit with that and just notice, like, where is it in your physical body? And once you notice the sensation, I even say, like, say out loud, like, I feel angry and I feel it in my head. I feel angry and I feel it in my stomach. And then ask yourself, like, what's under that? Because a lot of times when you actually allow yourself to notice that sensation, you'll start to see that there's actually something else. Like maybe the anger is really jealousy, or maybe the anger is really insecurity. And it just gives you a little bit of an outlet to start tapping into like what's underneath the anger. I think of it as, I forget who told me this, but they're like, anger is never driving the car. It's just riding in the front seat. There's some other emotion driving the car. Like a lot of times anger shows up and we're like, I'm so angry. And it's like, maybe you're actually insecure or sad or jealous. You're experiencing something else. So if you are listening and you struggle to even tap into any emotion but anger, just start to get curious. And then, asking yourself that question of like, why? Why am I angry? Well, I'm angry because this happened. Why am I angry? And you can keep asking why. And a lot of times, whatever's underneath will start to come out.
That's interesting for me because it's really hard for me to get angry these past couple of years. It's like a lot of things don't get me angry, or I can't really express anger. I'm not sure if it's from like life philosophies I've adopted from books or resources I've read. Um, it's like if I try to just force myself to get angry, I can't do it. Um, like I get annoyed. I can get annoyed kind of easily, but it's like it doesn't alchemize into like full blown anger or have any lasting periods of like no more than a minute or two. If I do feel anger, it just dissipates really quickly. But it's like from what you're saying is I'm sure I could keep asking the same questions. Why don't I get angry? I could do like the whole reflective of that.
And I'm curious, has this always been true for you, or is this something in more recent years? Like, do you feel like when you were younger, like when you were around 7 years old, did you, was anger something you would more experience then, or was it still kind of like I didn't really experience anger?
I think honestly, as a child, I feel like I did the whole spectrum of emotions. Even I would say that these past couple years, is when I started to notice. Because I'm 24 now, so probably when I was during the pandemic, right after pandemic, was when I stopped feeling a lot of anger, a lot of feelings and expressions of anger. I would say that seems to be true for me. So yeah, I think as a yeah,
It could be that, yes.
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I was gonna say it could be because, like you said, you've done some of this deeper work, and you're like, that's just not something that comes up. And I know it could be because I used to really struggle letting myself get angry because I had this belief that anger was bad. And so for some people, it could be like I said that you've just worked through it, and you're like, anger just doesn't really come up for me. But I know from in my own life, it's that I thought anger was a bad thing, and it was bad to feel angry, and I didn't realize that like every emotion can have like a healthy and an unhealthy expression. And anger is the same way. Like anger is not bad. It's what you do with the anger. Like anger can be a sign that something is, not just, or something wasn't right and you get angry. But if you, suppress your anger, you internalize your anger, it can turn into a rage, and that's not healthy.
How would you know when it's healthy or the correct decision for you to express anger rather than because for me, mentally, I can put it to the side. I could suppress it or avoid it or just go through it really quickly. But how would I know that I'm just avoiding the emotions and when to allow myself to feel that and express it through my body?
Yeah. I think it's always healthy to let yourself experience it. So again, that could be taking a second to sit down and be like, acknowledge I'm really angry right now, and notice where it shows up in your body. And most of the time with emotions, if you actually do that, they will dissipate most of the time, unless our mind gets a hold of it and starts spinning stories about it. Most of the time they will dissipate. Where the line is kind of drawn, it's your emotions are yours to experience, and it's healthy to experience them and regulate them. What's not healthy is when we start to project them onto other people. So what would be unhealthy is if you're like, I feel angry, and now the person that, is like, maybe I find to be the source of my anger, I'm going to go yell at, and I'm going to tell them how angry, and I'm going to like throw my anger onto them. That's when it becomes unhealthy. Now you can still go and have a conversation if you're, maybe you're in a relationship with someone, and you're like, this happened and I am really angry about this. And you can tell them, but there's a difference between sharing with them what you're experiencing and projecting what you're experiencing onto them.
Yeah, that's a huge difference between those two. Something that I was always fascinated by, and I would love to hear your perspective from this. What's your belief on the love languages? Do you think that they are accurate, or do you think there are a lot of baloney? Or it's like, what is your take on like the love languages?
Yeah. I think the love languages can be a great tool. I like anything in life. I think there's, leave what resonates, or sorry, keep what resonates, leave the rest. I don't think it's the end all be all that if you know your partner's love language, you can always love them in the right way. But I do think it can be a helpful tool to know, just like I said before, like, what is your definition of love? Asking your partner, like, what feels like love to you? Like, what actions give you the experience of love? So I know me, like, because I've read the book a few times, I know that quality time, like when I spend quality time with, whether it's my partner or just my friends, my people, like, I feel really good. I feel recharged when our phones are put away, we're having deep conversation, that lights me up. Whereas, I look back at like my mom, if you, did the laundry for her or took the car, to get something done in like an act of service, like to her, that went into her definition of love. So like anything, I think it can be a helpful tool. It's kind of like the frosting on the cupcake, but it's not necessarily the cupcake. Like, I don't think that's the one thing that's just going to transform everything, but I think it can definitely add to it. And I think it's always really healthy to get curious and ask your partner, like, what could I do that would, or like, make you feel more loved? Like, is there, does it build you up when I like say words of affirmation? Like, or if I leave a love note, like if that really lights your partner up, it's like, do more of those things. But again, I don't know that it's, that one thing is going to just transform everything.
That frosting on a cupcake is pretty good though. I can't deny that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important because I know for me, like gifts, I'm like, well, I like getting gifts, but they don't necessarily make me feel like I don't feel love. Maybe I feel appreciation. Whereas like if I sit down with someone and we have a deep conversation for an hour, like afterwards, I'm like, oh, I feel so loved, So it's good to know and get curious about like how your partner wants to be loved.
And when I did the quiz myself, it's overwhelmingly quality time for me is my dominant love language. So I understand all about that for sure. Besides defining what love is, while for you and your partner in a relationship, what are some other words that you think would be a good idea to define and get a clear understanding of each other's perspectives on while in the relationship?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have any specific words that I'd be like, let's get, it would more be getting clear on what conflict can be a big one, like what that looks like. And again, that's kind of some self-work you can do, is getting curious about like, what did conflict look like growing up for me? What do I want it to look like now? And what are the things that are more triggers for me? Because again, uncomfortable conversations are an important part of relationships, and being able to have those, a lot of times it can be difficult if the idea of conflict, if like a disagreement means a fight, so getting clear, it's not necessarily on the definition of the word, but getting clear on like, hey, if we have a disagreement, like what is that like for you? Is that just like, okay, we're having a difference of opinion, we need to talk it through? Or does it feel like, a fight? Because if you grew up in a household where, well, if mom and dad disagreed, they started cursing and yelling and slamming doors and hitting each other, that person is probably going to be like, I don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation because it doesn't feel safe and secure. Oh, and then that might be I just said it, another word is, what does security mean to you? Like what, like not just like what feels secure to you. And I don't mean feel as in just this like emotional feelings realm. I mean like physically, like what makes you feel at ease in your body and that sense of groundedness and peace. That can be helpful to know, especially when you're having uncomfortable conversations, because then it's like, if you know what your partner needs to feel like secure, that even when you are having to work through something more difficult, you can still kind of provide them with that sense of like security and safety.
Yeah, love and security seems to be two very powerful or big topics to get clear on. Um, what is your perspective on core values as an individual in their relationship? Do you find that couples who have similar core values tend to do better long term? And what happens when you see couples who have completely different core values to where nothing that they value in life is similar?
Good question. I don't think you have to have the exact same core values to be in a relationship with someone, but they need to complement one another. And if they're opposing, then the relationship will likely have a lot of conflict in it. So, for instance, if you value honesty and telling the truth, and your partner doesn't have a problem with lying a lot of the times, that's going to be in opposition. It doesn't mean your partner has to have the same value on that you do, but they need to complement each other so that they can work together.
That makes sense. That's also like a dance. You can put an analogy there on that. Um, hmm. What if?
Yeah, you might not be taking the same steps, but the steps you're taking, they work together.
It's like I walk with the left foot, you walk with the right foot. It's like, and then the middle feet are kind of tied together. It's the way I look at it as well. What effect do you see from social media and society and the culture that affects couples the most?
There's so many things. I think one of the things is it gives us a false sense of what relationships can really look like and really be, because again, social media, it's the highlight reel, right? Like I'm gonna post the Valentine's Day flowers I got for my partner. I'm not gonna post about, the fight we had about the dog sleeping on the bed. It's like that kind of thing. So we can get this idea that everyone is just having these great relationships except for me. And we can start comparing our person to, someone else's person. And I think that comparison can really be detrimental to relationships. I think there's also a level of temptation now that is available to us that never was before, because there are so many people out there and we have access to so many people. And I think that can add stress to relationships. And then the last thing I'd say, just like off the top of my head about social media, apart from really just having the highlight reel, is I feel like, and it's kind of not just social media, I would equate this to like dating apps, where I think people are almost more like items on a menu versus like, getting to know someone for like the soul they truly are. And there's that world of like, with social media, and I know I kind of switched also to dating apps, but it's like that instant gratification and that like, well, if that doesn't work, next. I think it puts us in this place where we expect things to just come easy and quickly to us. And there's less of this idea that, I actually, again, the growth, I've got to work for this. Like I've got to actually put time and dedication into it. I think of, a relationship's like a house plant. you have to nurture it and feed it and water it and take care of it and prune it at times in order for it to grow. But with social media, it's almost this idea like, okay, I just have to like get the person, have the wedding, all the stuff, and then it's good. So I think it can just give us this false sense of what reality looks like.
Yeah, that was really good. I need to. There was a lot of truth in there that I need to. I'm gonna have to rewatch and re-listen to many times during the editing process, of course, too as well. Um, I think I got like two big questions before we conclude this episode. One of them being, how would you guide a couple once a huge shock of trust was broken? Perhaps a partner was lying about what was going on with work and that affects their finances, or it's say someone in the relationship cheats on the other person. Um, how would you guide couples to work through that to help them decide what the best path of action is to be taken afterwards?
And the first thing I would do is I would encourage both of them separately to take some time to get clear on like, do I want this relationship to continue? And am I willing to put in the work for it to continue? Because getting past something like infidelity or big secrets that were kept, it's not necessarily easy, right? It's not easy work. And so am I dedicated to, us trying to repair this? And if the answer is yes, yeah, rebuilding, trust is not an easy feat. And I think it can be really helpful for the person whose trust was betrayed to get clear on what it is they need in order for the trust to be reestablished. Like, what is it you need for the trust to be reestablished? And that a lot of times is where I'm like, having a practitioner work with you and someone who can support you in figuring that out, or a mentor, can be really helpful, because a lot of times when you're in the thick of it, like you don't really know what you need from that person. And then it's for the person who was kind of the perpetrator, whether the person who cheated or lied, it's how willing are you to, really shine a light on what you've done? Like, are you willing to put in the work to rebuild the trust? Because, a lot of times it'll happen if one partner cheats and then, they kind of fix it and make up, and then the other partner never really feels safe and secure again. That's going to just be that undercurrent in the relationship, to where maybe the person that did cheat is like, well, I've tried, I don't know what to do. So it's both people have to get to a point where it's like, are you both dedicated to trying to work through this? So I'd say step one is getting quiet with yourself and asking yourself, am I really truly willing to put in the work to heal this? Because if the answer is yes, then I would strongly encourage you to get support, whether it's from, a therapist, a mentor, someone you both know, as you work through it. But if the answer is no, then, how can we gracefully untie this instead of, again, don't cut what you can untie.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. I like that a lot. So before I asked the last, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Oh no. Can you hear me? Mic check. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna. So I have a process that I could figure out what I could do in case it all goes bad. I'm recording my phone in case it goes out. Can you hear me? Are we still good? Okay. Before I ask the last big question, where can people go to find you, to contact you, to help support you in any way? Where would you like them to go?
Yeah. So go to relearnrelationships.com. It's just the word relearn, the word relationships.com. And that is where you'll find the majority of my content. I'm actually moving everything to that platform. It's a Substack platform. And that's where you'll find me, and you'll find more content and information about the work I do. And I have a podcast that's launching through that platform. So yeah, relearnrelationships.com.
And as always, those links to that you just mentioned will be in the show notes, in the description, so people can easily find you through there. And so, last big question, and you could put this in any genre as you'd like. What is one intuitive, deep felt message that you would like to express to the world, whether it's in the relationship space or just life in general? What is something that as that you believe is very powerful and you would like to see all of humanity adapt and absorb? What is that message that you truly want to express?
I think this can be tied to the relationship space, but this is actually something that has just come out of my life and my life experience. And that is that pain has the potential to produce more growth than happiness ever could if you choose to grow through it. And I would love for people to get curious, but also I'm an optimist. So find some hope in that even in your pain, if you choose to find that growth in it, like that can transform your life. And so that's something that I've held true and has gotten me through a lot, and realizing that, even when things get really difficult, that this is happening for me and I'm going to choose to grow through this.
It's happening for me and not to me. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Lily, thank you so much for
Thank you so much for having me on.
it's the pleasure's all mine. Shout out to Threads. Threads really has connected me with a lot of beautiful and amazing people, and it's really exciting because I really enjoy and value these conversations with people like yourself, and I trust that the information will reach the right people with the right message at the right time. And so, thank you for all of the wisdom and um, love that you've shared. I greatly appreciate you, and thank you again for joining the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, who knew Threads? I just jumped on there, so I'm glad I did.